Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. We've got in the co-captain's chair today, I'm thinking he's this way, but he could be that way. Martin Popoff joining us once again. Good morning, Martin. How are you doing today?
How you doing, Pete? Yeah, I'm doing fine. Ready to do this. Good old classic Canadian band today, right?
That's right. You know, we get a lot of requests for Canadian bands here on the channel, and most of my viewers who are from the Great White North are usually very thankful when we feature some of the Canadian bands. We've done a lot of them, and we've done a top 10 songs of Moxie like a year ago or so. And then we get a lot of people asking for, how about the albums? They don't have a lot of albums. We'd love to hear you guys talk about them. I said, Martin, he's the guy for this. So I know Martin is pretty well versed in Moxie, and I've been listening to these guys for a long time too. I think they're a great band. And I know we're going to get people going to be like, Moxie? Who the hell is that? Well, this is a band you should pay it some attention to, I think. And there's a couple notable reasons why. So we're going to rank these in the order of our preference. So we have not compared notes. So I don't know how Martin's ranked these. We got 5 albums in total. So we're going to start off at number 5, work our way to number 1, and Martin's going to kick us off with his number 5.
Okay, so my number 5 is this record here, Under the Lights. Okay, I don't know, you probably don't recognize this guy. But that's Mike Reno from Loverboy, right?
Got a little more hair than we normally see. Right?
Yeah, and it's definitely a little skinnier here too. He gained a few pounds later. Funny guy, man. What a great interview. He's just the most hilarious guy to interview. He really puts you at ease, and he's good at cracking jokes. So basically, this is the last record before they broke up for a long time, and then had a reunion, etc. So this is recorded February '78. They've got a new drummer in, but yeah, the big change is no Buzz Shearman, their early classic vocalist. So this is a pretty light album. I have rated it my least favorite, and it's definitely poppy. It's not recorded that well. It's produced by Jack Richardson at Nimbus 9. Jack's a famous Canadian producer, Alice Cooper, etc. Guess Who. But yeah, it's just kind of a light record. High School Queen is kind of pretty heavy. Maybe I'm a Dreamer's kind of a pop rocker on it, but it reminds me a lot of Moxie II, which we'll talk about when we talk about. So yeah, this is almost like a precursor to Loverboy. I think everybody's eye was not on what was going on. For some reason, they're just basically trying to get a hit. You know, this is the last sort of gasp with Polydor, trying to figure out how to make some money at this game. It hasn't worked for them so far. New vocalist, kind of a light vocalist. Everybody kind of rused the fact that they got Mike in. They didn't feel like he was that heavy, and the songs don't reflect it as well. So just sort of a limp, semi-hard rocking album, semi-poppy album that kind of goes nowhere. And a weird year for metal, right? 1978, everything's kind of shifting. All of our bands are kind of doing mellower stuff. It seems to sort of be the trend, and it doesn't work for them, and they break up.
Yep. Well, my number 5 is the same album. So Under the Lights from '78. Yeah, I honestly really don't like this album much at all. It's very lightweight, very poppy. You know, Mike sounds like Mike. He sounds okay. It just kind of sounded weird hearing him in this band. I don't know. Easy come, easy go. Decent rocking songs. Got kind of like a Bad Company feel. But I find the album as a whole just kind of lacks direction. And again, it's a perfect example of a band that in 1978, they're like, what are we doing? How do we fit in? I mean, music's changing, and we lost our great vocalist, and we got this new guy, and it doesn't sound like a Moxie album to me when you listen to the 3 that came before. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think, and we'll talk about it a bit coming up. I think the second album has a little more in common with this, maybe from production standpoint, lack of heft, on the guitars especially. But yeah, not a very good album. And again, I think this band is perhaps and sadly more notable for the fact that at 2 different points in time featured 2 very notable guys, or guys who have become pretty notable, right? But really had nothing to do with the essence that is Moxie. So yeah, that's my number 5 as well. So we matched there.
All right. And you know what? I'm going to, I'll leave it the way I originally planned it here, because I was going to do a switch, because I was conflicted right to the end here. But so anyways, my number 4, I'm going to go with Moxie 5. So what is happening on this record? This is a reunion record for them, way up into, what is the year on here? 2000, yeah, 2000, right? So they get in Brian Maxim, called Max B. Maxim, a good throaty, bluesy lead singer. It reminds me of Nicky Moore replacing Bruce Dickinson in Samson, a little bit of that vibe to it. But it's got really cool production. It's self-produced by the drummer Bill Wade and Moxie, who sadly died July 27th, 2001. Buddy Kane is in the band at this point. Earl Johnson is the mainstay, so he's in the band. So pretty legitimate lineup. They've known Brian Maxim for many years. So the cool thing about this record, number one, I'm in Toronto, and you know, they kept playing all around here all the time. They even have a live album kind of based off this thing. But yeah, they've been kind of mainstays around town. I don't know how much lately in the last few years, but Earl was always around. You know, you would go to, you know, I'd be in or go to record shows, and Earl would be there. You know, he'd have a little Moxie table set up and stuff, or he'd just be, you know, walking around buying records. He's from Oshawa, which is a little east of here. But this record is actually kind of a pleasant surprise, as we were talking earlier before we started here, Pete. I mean, basically, this reminds me of, it's a little bit Led Zeppelin-y, but more than anything, it's got a real Helix feel to it. It's got a good party Helix feel. Good standard meat and potatoes rock and roll, a lot of songs on it. And it's got this interesting, you know, it's neat that Bill Wade is producing the thing, because it's got this interesting sort of slapback echo drum sound to it, and a good kind of solid production value. And Brian just has this good, you know, whiskey soaked historic sort of voice that just has that little bit of a tie to Buzz. But no, this was a pleasant surprise. It's a pretty heavy album. The album cover's not great. The album cover on Raw is not great either. This is the early days of computer graphics, so they kept it simple. We know Moxie had simple album covers anyways. But yeah, I believe at the time I wrote up the bio for this, for the label when they were doing it. It came out through Pacemaker, which is a local label here. Mastered by Nick Blagona at Metalworks, Gilmore's place. Nick is sadly not with us either. But yeah, pretty cool album. Yucatan Man, Nitro Love, these earlier songs on here. Really cool kind of melody on this later semi-epic ballad, Not for the Glory, Not for the Gold. But yeah, pretty decent album. I almost, so on the fly there, I almost switched this with my number 3 to move it up a little. But yeah, it's a good album. People should check it out.
We are on the same page again. That is actually, and I was telling Martin, because that was the one, when we decided to do this show, that was the one Moxie album that I had not heard. So I went on YouTube and I listened to it a few times. I'm actually pretty surprised at how strong it is. It's good. And I agree with you 100%. The production is really, really an easy listen. It's big. The guitars sound huge. There's a lot of crunch on those guitars on this album. So it's definitely more of a metal album, you know, than Under the Lights specifically. Brian Maxim fits the band pretty well. The album's a bit on the long side, but then again, that's the kind of CD era, right? I mean, there's a couple songs too many, but I think Fire Down Below, Burn in the Night, Yucatan Man, you mentioned, Walk on the Wild Side, all really strong albums. It's nice and heavy, crunchy. I was pleasantly surprised. And if that's kind of the last studio thing we hear from this band, not a bad one to go out on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. All right. My number 3, I'm going to go with Moxie II, right? So this is obviously their second record, 1976. You know, the guys are not too happy with this record. What was happening at this point is Buddy Kane is coming into the band, co-guitarist with Earl. He's listed on the credits on the first album, but he's not on it. I mean, basically, this is him coming in and writing more as a team. And they definitely go for a lighter sound on here. They say they get lighter production values on it as well. It's listed up as producer as Jack Douglas and Eddie Leonetti, but Earl told me that basically, you know, they paid for the rights more or less to have Jack Douglas's name on it. They said they never saw him. So Jack Douglas of Aerosmith fame, right? So it's Eddie Leonetti of Angel and Rex fame who's actually producing the thing with them. And even the studio, there's a little dispute about the studio. They think it's Nimbus 9, but it was called Soundstage, and it might have been a name change at some point. But Earl is like, you know, confused about where this record was actually recorded. But yeah, so the idea was they were trying to get a few hits with 'Cause There's Another and Take It or Leave It, which is sort of like a light disco-y, funky, hard rocky song that bands were doing at that time. And Earl says, you know, he's not completely upset about this record because he said it really raised their profile in Canada, but in the States he said it sunk like a rock. And you know, he says basically we could have gone out, we should have just played Moxie 1 because nobody had a clue about Moxie 2. Nobody really liked it. So so that was the first single. There was another single, the 'Cause There Another song is another single. Cool little story. Buddy Kane told me that there's this kind of honking guitar sound at the beginning of 'Cause There's Another. And they had, it was Lee DiCarlo, the engineer, and Eddie Leonetti. They had a lot of good ideas. They were creative. They were funny guys. But he said they had a pig nose amp that they put on a floor tom and had him play through the pig nose amp. And they mic'd the floor tom skin. And that's how they got that buzzing, honking noise at the beginning.
Wow, well, because the pig nose definitely has a honking kind of quality to it.
Oh yeah. But they were literally recording the actual skin of the thing. So
wow.
So yeah, Terry Yerrick on bass, Bill Wade is the drummer at this point. But yeah. So yeah, just basically you know, kind of southern rocking, kind of April Wine-ish, kind of, you know, just a little neither here nor there, and a decided lightening up on the actual production of the guitars on it. So everybody considers it's kind of a weak T Moxie album, the classic lineup.
Yeah, we're matching yet again. We're 3 for 3, Martin. So yeah, Moxie II from '76 is going to be my number 3. Yeah, I'm not digging the production on this album. It's kind of dry, a little too airy, lacking any kind of power. You know, you mentioned how it's got kind of like this southern rock feel, and I totally get that. And you mentioned a little bit of disco. That's like, we don't want to mention disco with Moxie, but you know what? There's this kind of like funk meets boogie type of thing going on probably half the songs, which is like a real change of pace from the first album. And it doesn't quite work. You know, Slipping Out, kind of a cool tune. It's got that kind of James Gang feel a little bit to it, you know, little bits of boogie and heavy rock and blues. You got the talk box guitar going on there. I think the one song that's kind of a little bit interesting on here, and maybe kind of is like a precursor to the third album, is that Midnight Flight song, which I hear like a little bit of like early Riot on almost, you know, it's kind of similarities there, you know? So, but yeah, a good enough album. But I think if a couple things were tweaked, it might have been a much better album. I think, you know, some of the songs are decent. It's a fun album, but it's just, compared to the other two we're going to talk about next, not quite up there. To me, there's a big divide between both of our numbers 1 and 2, however they kind of rank here, and the rest of the catalog.
Yeah. Okay. All right. My number 2, I'm going to go with the debut, Moxie, of course. Yeah, there we go. So very simple album cover, just like the 2 cover essentially. But so this was a really heavy album for 1975, and it really got them some notoriety. You know, oddly in Texas, you know, there's all that apocryphal story of the San Antonio radio station who loved heavy metal. I mean, they brought Budgie to town in Saxon, right, early on, and they loved Triumph, they loved Moxie. So Canadian bands would go there, and Moxie basically got played on the radio a lot down there. So Texas was their big territory. And this record is kind of Led Zeppelin-ish, kind of geometric, a little bit BTO-ish, and some of it, I'm gonna say, there's a little bit of negativity to it in that I find it a little bit dated. I find the hard rock and the heavy metal on it a little bit too like rootsy early American bluesy hard rock, you know, coming out of Mountain and Cactus sort of feel. Again, a little bit BTO. I don't love a lot of the songs on here, but I love the fact that it's pretty heavy and well produced. For some reason, I know I have these reasons all over the place because I did interview all these guys, and I've written up the story of these albums in that old Ye Old Metal series that I did years and years ago. So there's a lot of stuff about Moxie I've forgotten, but I mean, this was recorded at Sound City in California, which is pretty odd for a baby Canadian band to go down there and do that. And one of the funny things that happened was Earl was having a dispute with the producer, and essentially he knew Tommy Bolin, and Tommy Bolin was around. He brought Tommy Bolin in, and Tommy does all of the solos on the album except for 2 songs, right? So essentially, this is kind of one of those cool long lost, or asterisk kind of Tommy Bolin records, although he was never, considered to actually be in the band. But yeah, pretty heavy record, well regarded out there in the marketplace. I mean, people love it. For 1975, certainly coming out of Canada. Actually, if I really thought about it, it'd probably be the heaviest record. It would rival maybe Rush Fly By Night or Rush 1, actually. 74 and 75 for heaviest records at the time. Tease hadn't made a record yet. BTO, I don't think really had a record this heavy, I would say. Not Fragile is
not Fragile, yeah.
But it actually starts with 2 of the slightly mellower songs, and then the rest of the album basically stays heavy through the whole thing. So yeah, people love this record and appreciate it for being so bravely heavy for the day.
Yep. Yeah. So my number 1 and 2, obviously we know what they are. I debated this over and over all week and switched these around so many times. And then I said, you know what? I did this last night at like 10 o'clock last night. I said, you know what? I'm not going to debate this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to go number 2 just because I think I have a little bit more of a closer tie with my number 1 choice. So number 2, I'm going to go with Ridin' High from 77.
Interesting. Okay.
This is a great album. And if you ask me next week, this might be my number 1 favorite from them. This is a really good album. I think Douglas's production on here is very, very good. It's got the right amount of atmosphere. It's got the right amount of punch. Title track kicks ass. Young Legs, Sweet Reputation, Are You Ready? Lots of cranking guitar riffs, and that's what you want from this band. Plenty of groove, memorable songs. I don't know. I just think this is a really good album. And like I said, the only reason it's not my number 1 today is because I have a lot of history with the first album, and Tommy Bolin factor, and you have to make these decisions sometimes, right, when you're doing a show like this. So if we did this next week, it'd probably be role reversal here, but for today, Ridin' High, a very strong number 2, and there's not much separating them. In fact, they're pretty much equal in my book.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit and say I actually
and that's
have
cool.
Yeah. I have a big separation between Moxie and Ridin' High. To me, it was no contest. So my number 1 is Ridin' High. I think everything came together. It was just just a lot of band chemistry. Buzz Shearman is just like howling away. He's just doing that alley cat on a fence howl throughout this album. He's just got so much magnetism as a lead singer. I feel like I'm a little gun shy to even say it was produced by Jack Douglas, given the previous story, because I didn't get to go read. I wrote a big, long the history of this record, and I've just forgotten most of it, right?
But regardless of who produced it, they did a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's a really, but it's also very like earthy and distorted and just lively. It's just a really heavy production song and a sound. And I know Earl has one story that he keeps saying that, we'd go into radio stations and we'd play the song Ridin' High, which is one of the heaviest songs on it. And he'd say that, the dials would go into the red, and he just knew we weren't going to get any radio play with this. But, it's got songs like, So Nothing Comes Easy is like a very sort of a meat and potatoes rockin' with a little bit of that old boogie thing. So they're trying to, shed the vestiges of that boogie past. You and I have talked before about how you could take an A-B switch to songs like Cat Scratch Fever and Strutter and find like the boogie part moving into the modern heavy metal part into the boogie part. Well, Nothing Comes Easy is another one of those, right? Because it's got a boogie verse and then it's got this massive heavy chorus to it. But Rock Baby, just pure modern heavy metal. Sweet Reputation, Symphony for Margaret, super heavy metal. And there you get a crazy, crazy Bill Wade drum performance on it. Young Legs got a little bit of that funkiness to it. Are You Ready? Same sort of thing. It's got one of these haunting reprises of Nothing Comes Easy, playing rock. It's Nothing Comes Easy playing rock and roll. So it's one of these like It's a Long Way to the Top if you want a rock and roll kind of songs. And it sounds like that. Earl does most of the writing on here, more so than Buddy. So this is a very Earl heavy album. But I've often argued, I think it's probably one of the heaviest records of the 70s, maybe. Well, later on, there's things like Motorhead albums and Heavy Load, and there's Rainbow Rising. So no, I mean, but in Canada, certainly one of the heaviest Canadian albums of the 70s. And very heavy throughout, very rough and ready production sound. And yeah, the best we're going to ever hear from Buzz, because sadly Buzz dies in it's a motorcycle accident, I believe, right? A few years later. But obviously he's out of the band at that point as well. But yeah, so this is the record that basically, and you know how we talked about that blue album cover thing, right? To me, the album cover of this, doesn't it look a lot like Star's Violation album cover?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, pretty weird.
Now that I think about it, yep.
Really bizarre. So yeah, just a cool album cover and a blue album where I think they completely found their sound. But find their sound, I mean, they had 5 different sounds across these 5 albums, so they never did find their sound. I just think one with their sound. So there you go. That's my number 1, and I think we know what your number 1 is.
Yeah, and like I said, I can't really disagree with your choice there, because it was my number 1 2 days ago, and I just kept. I think the problem is I think about this stuff too much, and I should just always go with my gut. But I kind of went with the gut last night on this. So Moxie, the debut. This is the album that got me into this band, and again, it's got the Tommy Bolin connection. I think this one is more of a metallic album and a true metal album. And I think there's a lot of good metal moments on here, but it's a good mix of kind of atmosphere and big riffing. Buzz's vocals are great on this album, great on that album too. He's just a really, really good singer. The story, I mean, you mentioned it, Mark Smith getting pissed at Earl and just Tommy Bolin's hanging out nearby, whatever, bringing him in. That's such a great story. That's like a great rock and roll story. That's actually the first time I ever heard about this band was through the Tommy Bolin connection, because I was a fan of Tommy, and it's like, oh, did you ever hear the Moxie album he appeared on? I'm like, Moxie? Who the hell's Moxie? Was it a band he had? It's like, no, but he just happened to record some solos on there. So, kind of a cool story. But, Moonrider, Time to Move On, Train is grinding and heavy, Out of the Darkness. Can't You See I'm a Star's got these big riffs. I don't know. I love this album. I love both of them. So, for me, or for anybody watching, and obviously, I'm sure Martin will agree, it's like if you're going to get any 2 Moxie albums to kind of see what the hell they're all about, these are the 2 to get.
Yep.
There's some good stuff on a few of the other ones we talked about, but for me, it's always been about these 2, head and shoulders the best. So, I'm going to go with this one today, but I could change my mind next week. They're both great as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, with this band, it's pretty clear. I think most people would have 0 contrarian choices. I mean, they'd essentially line up with the way we lined up. There's not a lot of controversy, really, between these. What are their best albums? And like you say, one of them's possibly the more metallic modern album, and the other one's the more earthy, daring for its time, heavy album, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting? So I've been toying for a while of doing a show about bands who did like a complete about face from a very strong classic album to the next. I mean, this going to Under the Lights, I mean, how like change of pace is that? That's like night and day, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, and I, you think of the biggest example is more or less Stars, right? Stars going from Violation to Attention Shoppers, and then you think of the Derringer Band changing from Sweet Evil through If I Weren't So Romantic, I'd Shoot You through to the solo Derringer stuff. So a lot of bands, mellowed out quite a lot. Even a lot of the punk bands I liked, moved on to post-punk and got really mellow really fast, right? A lot of changes. But
and it happened in prog a lot too, right? Late 70s into the 80s, a lot of those prog bands had no idea what to do, and all of a sudden they're doing pop and new wave. It's like, what is this, right?
Yeah. And in prog, it's kind of a bit of a different problem. In prog, they really adopted technology when they moved on, right? So Genesis, yes, moving into Asia, moving into all those later Yes albums and GTR and stuff. So yeah, and you're right. The songs got shorter and poppier, but this was, as I say, I mean, I find this whole 78 to 79 period really fascinating. Kiss is another example who really mellowed out across, the likes of Dynasty and Unmasked, right, around this time. So and other bands were just kind of imploding. Ted Nugent, Aerosmith. But Blue Oyster Cult was, said to be getting mellower. We obviously did our Blue Oyster Cult show, and they kind of really didn't. I mean, Mirrors is not that much mellower than Agents or Spectres, right? Yep. But yeah, this is an example. So, and Tease, to pick another band that's a parallel career to Moxie, tease as almost exactly the same kind of catalog. They did the same thing. It's like, oh my God, we need a hit. And they brought in other producers and other songs and basically went mellow, and the fans kind of revolted. So that's the story. And these Canadian bands always have this problem. You know, are we going to attack the States? Can we get into the States? Should we get into the States? When should we get into the States? And Moxie just never really kind of broke that barrier the way Rush totally did the whole time. BTO did a lot of touring in the States as well, right? But Moxie just had that one pocket where they did well, and then, you know, the records didn't back up the actions, and the actions didn't back up the records, and they basically just kind of flamed out after a few records.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, you had just those couple of bands, you know, like you mentioned, Rush and BTO and Triumph did very well here for a while, and you know, April Wine, I think we're almost there, not quite. And, you know, Max Webster never did any business here. Moxie never did much of any business here. We can go on and on all day talking about, you know, the great Canadian bands that just didn't make it here. But it's a shame.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Can't all make it in the world of music, right?
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. I mean, Rush is the big example of the best example of, they just basically went into the States and stayed in the States. They did more playing in the States, you know, more extensively than even covering Canada, because Canada is a hard place to play because it's so spread out, the major centers. And Moxie basically stayed a very, very regional band. They were just kind of like an Ontario band the whole time.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about Rush, and again, we're kind of derailing the conversation, but I think Rush always kind of did what they wanted to do, and people bought into it time and time again. And yeah, their music kind of changed, and I know their 80s stuff is very different from the 70s, but it's not so much like what Rush was doing in the 80s was really following any trends, maybe slightly, but you got to give them credit for constantly like reinventing their sound and going into different, you know, areas and what have you, and people still listened, and that's pretty cool, I think. So.
A funny parallel of this Under the Lights album that I just thought of was Sweeney Todd. You know the band Sweeney Todd? They
heard of them, but never heard them. Yeah.
So they had only 2 records. First one was pretty heavy. It's just called Sweeney Todd. Nick Gilder, who went on to a pretty, you know, semi-successful solo career. But the second album is called If Wishes Were Horses. It's white. It's got a gatefold. But the lead singer on that album is Bryan Adams. And it actually is also a pretty heavy album. You might like both of those albums, Pete.
Wow, Sweeney Todd. Yeah,
you know, probably hear them both in full on YouTube, no problem. But yeah, so it's a similar situation. Bryan Adams is the singer in this band who's about to go under, and he goes on to massive fame. And Mike Reno does the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna check that out. I've never listened. I've heard the name, never listened to him. It's always interesting when you have these like guys who became very famous later on, and then you go and listen to some of their really early stuff. It's kind of like the Rex stuff, right? It's like wow, is it the same guy?
yeah, crazy.
Yeah. So there you have another Ranking the Album series from us here today. So for those of you who are Moxie fans, feel free to rank these albums as you like them. Remember, there's no right or wrong answers here. Everybody kind of hears these albums differently. Martin and I did pretty much on the same page right to the end here today. Yeah. So that was not planned, but it does happen from time to time. Yeah. So anyway, everybody, visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. Follow us there. Follow us on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Martin, you want to plug anything here today?
Just martinpopoff.com is where all my books, anything that's in print is available there with PayPal buttons and everything. So yeah, check it out, martinpopoff.com.
Cool. I'm like 3/4 of the way through Anthem right now. Totally enjoying it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I just edited Limelight. I'm going to see the photo section soon. So Limelight will be out October 2020.
Awesome. Something to look forward to. Very good. So, all right, everybody, take care. Martin is coming back sometime over the next couple days. We're going to rank the catalog of Doom legends. I guess we can call them legends. Trouble. So that's coming up fairly soon. So stay tuned for that. And he and I are also working on some cool deep cut dive shows for next week. So a lot of good stuff coming from the two of us. Stay tuned, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
All right.